A quiet Tuesday morning, rain falling, a small town that should not exist on his map, the kind of place men like him don't notice, don't need, don't even remember exists. And yet, at exactly 6:00 a.m., the most feared mafia boss in 5 cities stood on a narrow wooden porch, water dripping from his dark coat, eyes fixed on a door that had been closed to him for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He hadn't knocked yet. He didn't need to. He could hear movement inside, soft footsteps, something small bumping into furniture, a faint laugh, high and careless, the sound of a child who had never known fear. His chest tightened. The door opened, and the world stopped. She stood there, framed by dim kitchen light, barefoot on old wood, wearing a simple sweater dusted with flour like she had stepped out of a life that didn't belong to him. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands falling around her face, softer than he remembered, quieter somehow. Smaller but stronger in a way that had nothing to do with power. In her arms, 2 children. For a second, his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. It tried to correct it, to reshape it into something that made sense. A neighbor's kids, someone else's life, anything but this. Then the girl on her left hip shifted, lifting her head. Golden eyes. His golden eyes. His breath left him like he'd been hit in the chest. The boy on her right side didn't move much. He just watched, silent, still. Those same sharp, assessing instincts in a face far too small to hold them. Dark hair, calm presence, his. The realization didn't come slowly. It crashed into him all at once, brutal and undeniable. Mine. His fingers twitched at his sides, the urge to reach for them so strong it made his hands shake. Those hands had broken men, signed deals worth millions, ended wars before they started. Now they trembled like they belonged to someone else entirely. Sarah. Her name broke in his throat. She didn't answer. She didn't soften. Her eyes met his and there was no shock there, no confusion, just recognition and something colder, something carved out of years he hadn't been there to see. Controlled. Guarded. Locked. The girl leaned closer to her, small fingers gripping her shoulder. Mama, who's that? Her voice was soft, curious, unafraid. He felt something inside him split open. Sarah's arms tightened around them just slightly, protective, instinctive. No one, she said, her voice calm, steady, like she had rehearsed it 100 times in her head. He came to the wrong house. A lie. He could hear it. But the children didn't know that. The boy tilted his head, still watching him, eyes narrowing just a fraction like he was trying to solve a puzzle no one had explained to him yet. And the girl, she kept staring. Right into him. Like she recognized something. Like some part of her already knew. His heart started pounding, too loud, too fast, like it was trying to make up for every second he had missed, every breath he hadn't been there to hear, every moment that had happened without him. Those children, his voice cracked, raw, stripped of everything that once made men fear him. There. Don't. The word cut through him. Sharp. Final. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. He stopped. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know what he was allowed to say. Rain slid down his face, soaked into his shirt, ran along his jaw. He didn't move, didn't wipe it away, didn't breathe properly. You shouldn't be here, she said. Simple. Cold. Like he was nothing. Like he hadn't spent 3 years tearing his empire apart trying to find her. Like he hadn't crossed cities, borders, alliances just to stand on this porch. Like he hadn't lived with the sound of that night echoing in his head over and over again. His throat tightened. I looked for you. You found me, she replied. Now leave. The door started to close. Panic hit him fast, violent, unfamiliar. Sarah. The wood slammed between them. The sound echoed, louder than any gunshot he had ever heard. The lock clicked. And just like that, she was gone again. He stood there, staring at the door, breathing hard, hands curling into fists that couldn't break anything this time, couldn't fix anything, couldn't force his way into a life that had learned to exist without him. Inside, he could still hear faint movement, her voice, softer now, calming. his children. His chest ached. He should leave. That's what she wanted, what any man with pride would do. But he wasn't that man anymore. Not when it came to her. Not when it came to them. Slowly, like the weight of the world had settled into his bones, he stepped back and lowered himself onto the porch steps. The wood creaked under him. Rain soaked through everything, clinging to his skin, dripping from his hair. He didn't move. Didn't knock again. Didn't call. Because for the first time in years, he had found something he couldn't afford to lose again. Inside the house, the girl's voice carried faintly through the door. "Mama, why does the big man look sad?" Silence. Then Sarah's voice quieter, tighter. "He's not sad, baby." A pause. "He's lost." And outside in the rain, the most powerful man in 5 cities lowered his head into his hands and stayed. The night everything broke did not begin with shouting or betrayal. It began softly, almost beautifully, the kind of night you would remember for all the wrong reasons later. Music drifted through the halls of the estate, low and elegant, wrapping itself around marble pillars and golden chandeliers like it belonged there. The city glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, lights blinking like 1,000 quiet promises, and inside that world of power and precision, I believed I was safe. I believed I was loved. That was my first mistake. I was supposed to be at his side that night. Every eye in the room would have expected it, the Don and his wife standing together, untouchable, unbreakable, a symbol of control and loyalty. But I wasn't there. I had been feeling off for days, a strange dizziness that came in waves, a heaviness in my body that didn't make sense. I told him I needed to rest. He had touched my forehead gently, pressed a kiss there like he always did, and told me not to worry, that he would handle everything. His voice had been calm, steady, the same voice that once made me feel like the world could not reach me. I believed him. I always did. I rested for a while, but something kept pulling at me. Not fear exactly, not suspicion, just a quiet unease that settled deep in my chest and refused to leave. The music below grew louder, laughter rising and falling, and I told myself I was being foolish. This was my life now. This was my home. There was nothing to fear here. And yet, I got up. I dressed carefully, choosing the black silk dress he once said made me look like I belonged beside him, not behind him. I told myself I was surprising him, that he would look at me the way he used to, that everything would feel right again. The hall was crowded when I stepped out, bodies moving, voices blending, but he wasn't there. Not in the main room, not near the bar, not with the men who usually surrounded him like shadows. I searched slowly at first, then faster, my heartbeat picking up in a way that made no sense. Someone greeted me, someone smiled, but I didn't stop. I followed instinct instead of reason, moving past the noise, past the lights, into the quieter part of the estate where only a few people were allowed to go. Our floor, our private space. The corridor was silent, too silent. His door was slightly open. Just enough for light to spill through. Just enough for sound to escape. I heard his voice before I saw anything. Low, rough, intimate. The kind of voice he never used in public, the one reserved for moments that belonged only to us. My hand froze on the handle. My mind tried to catch up, to explain it away, to find a reason that made sense, but something deep inside me already knew. Still, I pushed the door open. And everything inside me went still. He was there, in our bed, the same place where he used to pull me close after long nights, where he whispered things no one else was allowed to hear. And he wasn't alone. She was with him, my sister. Her red hair spilling across his chest like a flame that had finally found something worth burning. Her hand on him, his body too close to hers, too familiar, too wrong. For a second, time didn't exist. There was no sound, no breath, no thought, just a blank, ringing silence that swallowed everything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just stood there, watching the life I believed in collapse in front of me like it had never been real. He saw me first. Of course he did. His entire body went rigid, his expression shifting from something hazy and distant to something sharp, horrified, awake in a way that came too late. My name left his mouth like it hurt him. Sarah, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was nothing left inside me that could respond. She turned slower, deliberate, and when her eyes met mine, there was no guilt there, no shame, just satisfaction. Quiet, victorious satisfaction, like she had been waiting for this moment all along, like she had already won something I didn't even know we were fighting for. I closed the door. Gently, carefully, like sealing something that should never be opened again. Behind me, I heard movement, his voice rising, footsteps coming closer, the handle turning, but it didn't matter. Nothing he said could change what I saw. Nothing he explained could undo the image burned into my mind. I walked away before he could reach me, before he could say anything that might have forced me to feel something. Because feeling would have broken me, and I didn't have the luxury of breaking. That was the moment I disappeared. Not when I left the estate, not when I walked out into the night, but right there, in that hallway, with his voice behind me and silence inside me. The woman he loved died in that doorway, and the one who walked away, she didn't look back. I did not run immediately. That would have been too obvious, too emotional, too easy to stop. Instead, I walked. Slow, steady, controlled, the way you move when the world is watching and you refuse to give it the satisfaction of seeing you break. The music downstairs still played, laughter still echoed, glasses still clinked as if nothing had changed, as if my life had not just collapsed behind a closed door. I passed people who smiled at me, who nodded respectfully, who had no idea that the woman they were greeting no longer existed. I smiled back. That was the last lie I told inside that house. I reached our room, not the one I had just left, but the smaller private suite across the hall where I sometimes read when the estate felt too large, too loud, too suffocating. My hands did not shake as I opened the door. They did not tremble as I crossed the room. I packed one bag. Not the dresses, not the jewelry, not the expensive things that had once made me feel like I belonged in his world. I left all of that behind like it had never been mine. I took only what mattered. My mother's locket, a plain change of clothes, a small amount of cash I had hidden away for reasons I could not explain at the time but understood perfectly now. I paused once, just once, when I saw the photograph on the nightstand. Him standing behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, both of us looking like something unbreakable. I didn't take it. I didn't even touch it. I turned away. His footsteps were in the hallway now, closer, faster, calling my name like it still belonged to him. I didn't wait to hear what he would say. I slipped out through the back corridor, the one the staff used, the one no one important ever noticed. Power blinds you like that. It makes you forget the small doors, the hidden paths, the ways out that don't look like exits until you need them. I moved through kitchens that smelled of spices and heat, through narrow service passages, past people who lowered their eyes out of habit and never questioned where I was going. I walked like I had somewhere to be, like I had permission. No one stopped me. The air outside hit me like a shock, cold, sharp, real. For the first time that night, I could breathe. The estate loomed behind me, all stone and steel and silent watchers, a fortress built to keep enemies out and power contained. I stepped beyond its reach without looking back. That was the rule I made for myself in that moment. Do not look back. Not for him, not for the life you lost, not for anything that me caught. Hesitation would get me dragged back into a world that had already chosen to discard me. I moved fast once I reached the outer grounds, cutting across paths I had memorized during quieter days, slipping past checkpoints just before the guards rotated, staying in the blind spots that only someone who had lived there could know. Every second stretched thin with tension. If he sent men after me, and he would, this window would close quickly. The car I reached was not mine. Nothing in that place had ever truly been mine. But I knew where the keys were kept and I knew how to drive. I started the engine with steady hands and pulled away before anyone could question it. The city opened in front of me, lights stretching into darkness, roads leading everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I drove without direction at first, just distance. Distance from him, from her, from the memory that replayed behind my eyes no matter how hard I tried to push it away. The further I got, the quieter it became, the noise of the estate replaced by the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. I should have felt something then. Grief, anger, rage, anything. But there was nothing. Just that same hollow stillness, like my body had decided to shut down everything that could hurt me. I drove until the city faded, until the buildings gave way to empty roads and dark stretches of land that no one cared to claim. The car ran out of fuel somewhere past midnight. I left it where it died and kept moving on foot, the ground rough beneath my shoes, the air colder with every step. I didn't stop. Not when my legs ached, not when my lungs burned, not when the world around me became nothing but shadows and silence. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant feeling. And feeling was not something I could afford. Somewhere between one step and the next, the realization settled quietly into my bones. I was alone, completely irreversibly alone. No guards, no walls, no protection, no name that carried weight, just a woman on a road with a single bag and a future that no longer existed. And for the first time that night, something flickered through the emptiness. Not fear, not yet, something sharper, something colder. Survival. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what would happen next. All I knew was that I would not go back. Not to him, not to that life, not to the version of myself who had believed she was safe just because a powerful man said so. Whatever came after this, it would be mine. And somewhere far behind me, in a world of steel and power, a man who had never lost anything that mattered was just beginning to understand what it meant to lose everything. 3 days later, I stopped running. Not because I felt safe, but because my body refused to go any further. The road had turned from asphalt to dirt sometime in the early morning, the city long gone behind me, replaced by mountains that seemed to close in on themselves like they were hiding something, or someone. The air here was different, thinner, quieter, untouched by the kind of power that followed men like him. That was why I chose it, or maybe it chose me. Either way, when I saw the small wooden sign that read Gray Hollow, something inside me whispered, "This is where you disappear." The town looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. A handful of buildings clustered together, a single road cutting through it, no cameras on the corners, no black cars idling with engines running, no men watching from shadows. Just people. Normal people. The kind who woke up early, opened their shops, and cared more about the weather than who controlled the city 200 miles away. I stood at the edge of it for a long time, my bag hanging from my shoulder, my clothes still carrying the faint scent of a life I no longer belonged to. I waited for someone to recognize me, for someone to look too closely, for the world I ran from to catch up. No one did. I walked into Gray Hollow like I had always been there. The bakery was the first place I found, not because I was looking for it, but because the smell of fresh bread pulled me in before I could think. Warm, comforting, real. It hit something deep inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Hunger, not just for food, but for something simple, something honest. The woman behind the counter looked up when I entered. She was older, her hands dusted with flour, her eyes sharp in a way that told me she had seen more than she ever said out loud. She looked at me once from head to toe, taking in the exhaustion, the dirt, the silence wrapped around me like armor. "You need a job?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She nodded toward the back. "We open at 5. Be here before that if you want to keep it." No questions, no suspicion, just an offer. I stayed. The room above the bakery was small, barely enough space for a bed and a chair, but it was mine. The first thing that had been mine in a long time. I paid in cash. No names, no records, no ties, the kind of existence that didn't leave a trail. Every instinct in me screamed that it wasn't enough, that he would find me, that men like him always found what they were looking for. But days passed and nothing happened. No black cars, no footsteps behind me, no voice calling my name. The silence should have been comforting. It was. It felt like waiting. I worked early mornings, hands learning the rhythm of dough and heat and timing, muscles adapting to something real instead of ornamental. No one here knew who I was. They didn't care. To them, I was just another woman trying to make a living, quiet, polite, reliable. I kept my head down, my voice low, my past buried so deep it might as well have never existed. At night, I lay in the small bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the town settle into sleep, counting every breath like it was proof that I had made it through another day without being found. Then the sickness came back. It started as a wave of nausea that hit me in the middle of kneading dough, sharp and sudden, forcing me to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, the aftermath of everything I had been through. But it didn't stop. It came again the next day, and the next, stronger each time, accompanied by a dizziness that made the room tilt in ways that had nothing to do with fatigue. The doctor's office was 2 streets down, a small building with peeling paint and a sign that looked like it had been there longer than most of the town's residents. I almost didn't go. Almost convinced myself I could ignore it, push through it, survive it like everything else. But survival isn't about ignoring what's happening to you. It's about facing it before it breaks you. He was young, or maybe he just looked that way compared to the weight I carried. He asked simple questions, listened carefully, and didn't push when my answers stayed short. There was something steady about him, something grounded, like he belonged to this quiet world in a way I didn't yet understand. The test didn't take long. The result didn't take long either. "You're pregnant," he said, watching my face like he expected something to shatter. It didn't. Not at first. My mind tried to reject it, to push it away, to deny the possibility because accepting it meant everything had just become more complicated, more dangerous, more permanent. I stared at him, at the small piece of paper in his hand, at the reality written there in a way that couldn't be undone. "How far along?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "A few weeks, maybe more. We'll need to run more tests to be sure." More tests. More confirmation. More truth. I nodded slowly, like I understood something I didn't fully feel yet. When I stood to leave, the room tilted again, but this time it wasn't from dizziness. It was from the weight of what this meant. I walked back through the town, past people who smiled, past buildings that had started to feel familiar, past a life I had just begun to build. Pregnant. Not just running anymore. Not just surviving. Carrying something. Someone. His child. The thought hit me like a delayed explosion, cracking through the numbness I had been living in. I stopped in the middle of the street, breath catching, heart finally reacting to something real. Everything I had done, everything I had risked, everything I had left behind, it wasn't just about me anymore. It had never just been about me. And for the first time since that night, fear truly settled in. Because if he ever found out, if he ever knew, he wouldn't just come for me. He would come for them. The storm came the night they were born, the kind of storm that makes the world feel like it is being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. Wind howled through the narrow streets of Gray Hollow, rattling windows and bending trees like they were nothing, and I remember thinking, in the brief, broken moments between pain, that it felt fitting. Everything in my life had already been torn apart. Maybe this was the moment something new would take its place. I wasn't supposed to go into labor that early. The doctor had said I had time, weeks at least, time to prepare, to breathe, to figure out how I was going to do this alone. But life had never asked me what I was ready for. It simply decided, and I followed. The first contraction hit while I was closing the bakery, sharp enough to steal the air from my lungs, strong enough to make me grip the counter until my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was nothing. Stress. Exhaustion. Another lie. I needed to get through the next hour. By the third contraction, I couldn't lie anymore. The drive to the clinic blurred into fragments. Rain against the windshield, hands gripping the seat, my breath coming in uneven bursts as pain rolled through me in waves that felt endless. The doctor was already there when we arrived, his calm presence the only steady thing in a night that refused to slow down. Everything moved quickly after that. Voices. Instructions. Hands guiding me, grounding me, pulling me through something that felt impossible. And then suddenly, it wasn't just me anymore. The first cry cut through the storm, loud, fierce, unapologetic. A girl. They placed her in my arms, tiny and furious, her eyes opening almost immediately like she had something to prove to the world. Golden. Unmistakably golden. My breath caught, my heart stuttering in a way it hadn't since I left him. She looked at me like she already knew everything, like she had arrived with fire in her veins and no intention of ever being small. I almost broke then. Almost let everything I had buried rise to the surface, but there wasn't time. The second came quieter, softer. A boy. His cry was not a cry at all, more a small sound, like he was observing before reacting, taking in the world before deciding how he felt about it. They placed him beside his sister, and he settled instantly, his small body still, his presence calm in a way that felt impossible for something so new. His hair was dark, his features sharp in a way that would only grow more defined with time, and his eyes, when they opened, were not golden. They were mine. I stared at them both, the weight of reality settling into my chest in a way that no pain ever could. 2 children, 2 lives, 2 pieces of a past I had tried to leave behind, now wrapped in blankets and placed in my arms like they had always belonged there. Twins, the doctor said quietly, watching me carefully. You didn't know. I shook my head, unable to speak past the storm building inside me. I had prepared for one. One child I could protect, one life I could hide, one secret I could carry. This was something else entirely. This was double the risk, double the danger, double the reason for him to come looking if he ever found out. If. That word had never felt so fragile. The girl moved first, her tiny fingers gripping my shirt with surprising strength, her presence demanding attention, demanding space, demanding everything. The boy followed, not with urgency but with certainty, his small hand resting against my arm as if grounding both of us in the same quiet understanding. They were so different, and yet they were both his. That truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. I should have hated a connection that refused to be severed no matter how far I ran. But looking at them, holding them, feeling the fragile weight of their existence against my skin, I realized something that terrified me more than anything else. I didn't. I loved them. Completely. Without hesitation. Without condition. And that love changed everything. The world outside the clinic didn't know they existed. The storm swallowed the town, the night hiding everything that mattered, and for a few hours it felt like we were the only 3 people in existence. But storms pass. They always do. And when they do, the world comes back sharper, clearer, more dangerous than before. I named her Lena, strong, unyielding, a name that felt like it belonged to someone who would never let the world break her. I named him Ash, quiet, steady, something that remains even after everything else has burned away. Lena and Ash. My children. My responsibility. My reason to keep running. Because as I held them, as I listened to the fading storm and felt their small breaths against my skin, one truth became impossible to ignore. If he ever found us, he wouldn't just see them as children. He would see them as heirs. He did not start searching the night she left. That would have been too simple, too human, too slow for a man like him. The moment the door closed behind her, the moment her absence settled into the walls of his estate like a silence that did not belong there, something inside him shifted with a violence no one else could see. Men had feared him for years, cities had bent around his decisions, enemies had learned not to breathe too loudly in his presence, but none of that prepared him for what it felt like to walk into a room and realize she was no longer in it. At first he thought it was temporary. Anger, pride, wounded silence. He gave her time, hours that stretched into a night that never ended. By morning, the calm had fractured. By afternoon, it was gone completely. By nightfall, the Don who never chased anything was tearing through his own empire like it had betrayed him. Every exit was checked, every guard questioned, every camera pulled and replayed frame by frame until the footage blurred into meaningless motion. He watched her walk away through the back corridors, watched the exact moment she disappeared beyond his reach, and something cold and sharp settled into his chest. She had not run in panic. She had left with purpose. That realization made everything worse. He sent men first, not out of distance but out of instinct. Trained eyes, silent trackers, people who knew how to follow ghosts through crowded cities and empty roads. They returned with nothing. Not a trace, not a sighting, not even a rumor. She had vanished in a way that should not have been possible for someone without power, without protection, without the kind of network he controlled. That was when he understood the truth he had been avoiding. She had never needed his power to survive. The city became smaller in the days that followed, not because it changed, but because he did. Meetings were cut short, alliances delayed, enemies ignored. His attention, once spread across territories and deals and control, narrowed into a single, relentless focus. Find her. Nothing else mattered. Men who had once stood confidently in front of him began to hesitate, sensing something unstable beneath the surface, something that did not follow the rules they understood. Weeks passed, then months. The search did not slow, it deepened. He stopped trusting what he saw and started questioning what he knew. The night replayed itself in his mind with a clarity that grew sharper instead of fading. Every detail, every movement, every second that led to the moment she stood in that doorway. Something had been wrong, not with what she saw, but with what he remembered. Because he did not remember choosing it. That realization came like a fracture through stone, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. He went back to the beginning, to the hours before the night broke everything. Who had been there, who had spoken to him, who had poured his drink, who had stayed close when they had no reason to. Patterns emerged where he had once seen nothing. Small inconsistencies, tiny shifts that would mean nothing to anyone else but meant everything to a man who built his life on control. He started asking different questions. Men disappeared after those questions were asked. Not randomly, not without reason, but precisely, carefully, like pieces being removed from a board he was only just beginning to understand. Suppliers, intermediaries, people who handled things that were never meant to be traced. It took time. It took patience. It took a kind of focus that left no room for anything else. And then finally it broke open. The truth was not dramatic. It did not come with a confession shouted in fear or a moment of obvious betrayal. It came quietly, in a room far from the city, from a man who thought he was too small to matter and therefore too invisible to be noticed. A name was spoken. Then another. Substances mentioned that had no place in his world unless someone had put them there deliberately. Sedatives, controlled, specific, designed to blur memory, to weaken judgment, to create moments that felt real while stripping away the ability to control them. His hand tightened on the table as the pieces aligned, not slowly but all at once. Her, the sister, always near, always present, always watching. The way she had positioned herself in his space, the way she had closed distances that should not have been closed, the way she had looked at him like something to be taken, not respected. And behind her, something larger. A rival family, patient, strategic, waiting for the one weakness no one believed he had. They had not attacked his business. They had not challenged his power. They had gone for the one thing that could not be defended by guns or loyalty. Sorry. The room fell silent after the last piece was spoken, but the silence did not last. It shattered under the weight of what it meant. This had never been an accident. It had never been a mistake. It had been built, planned, executed with precision, meant to destroy something from the inside out. He stood slowly, the calm in his movements more dangerous than any visible anger. The man in front of him stopped breathing properly, sensing something final in the air, something that did not leave room for negotiation or regret. 3 years, 3 years of searching, 3 years of emptiness, 3 years of waking up in a space that still carried her presence and knowing he had lost it without understanding why. Now he understood. And understanding did not bring relief. It brought direction. He dismantled them piece by piece, not quickly, not carelessly, but thoroughly. The rival family did not fall in a single night. They unraveled over months, their operations collapsing in ways that made it look like coincidence until there was nothing left to question. The sister was harder, not because she was powerful, but because she had once been trusted. That made her more dangerous, not less. She disappeared in the end, not dramatically, not publicly, but completely, erased in the same way she had tried to erase someone else. It should have been enough. It was, because none of it changed the one thing that mattered. She was still gone, and somewhere in a world that no longer answered to him the way it used to, she was living a life that did not include him. He returned to the city after it was over, to the estate that felt larger and emptier than it ever had before. Power had been restored, control reestablished, every external threat eliminated. But the one thing he could not control remained out of reach. He stood in the same room where everything had broken and realized something that no one else would ever understand. He had won the war, and still lost everything that mattered. That was when the search changed again. Not wider, deeper, because if she had learned how to disappear once, then he would learn how to find her in ways no one had ever needed before. And this time he would not stop. It did not happen because of luck. Men like him do not believe in luck, and neither did the people who worked for him. It happened because somewhere, in a place so small it should have been invisible, a single detail slipped through the cracks. A photograph. Nothing important at first glance. Just a bakery website, the kind no one outside a quiet town would ever bother to look at, filled with and a life that had nothing to do with power or blood or control. She was not even centered in the frame. Just a blur in the background, flour on her hands, hair pulled back, head slightly turned as if she had been caught mid-motion. Anyone else would have scrolled past it without a second thought. His man didn't. It took 3 seconds. That was all. 3 seconds for recognition to spark, for memory to connect what the eyes were seeing with something that should not exist anymore. The image was sent without comment. No explanation. None was needed, because when the file opened on his screen, the room around him went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. He stared at it longer than he should have, longer than any man who claimed control would allow himself. The resolution was poor, the angle imperfect, but it was enough. Her face, older, quieter, changed in ways he could not yet define, but unmistakably her. Alive. Not hidden in shadows, not erased, not gone. Alive. His first instinct was to send men. It had always been his way. Distance, efficiency, control, but something stopped him, something sharp and immediate that cut through habit before it could take hold. 3 years had taught him many things. One of them was that sending others meant delay, meant mistakes, meant losing her again. He stood before anyone could speak. The room shifted instantly. Conversations died. Eyes lowered. No one asked where he was going. No one dared to suggest anything else, because the look on his face made it clear that whatever had just been set into motion was not something anyone could interfere with. The drive took hours, too long and not long enough at the same time. The city faded behind him, replaced by roads that narrowed, then broke, then disappeared into something that barely qualified as a path. He did not slow down. He did not question it. If she had chosen this place, it meant she had believed it was far enough. It was. By the time he reached Gray Hollow, the sky was still dark, the kind of early morning that belongs to people who wake before the world does. The town looked exactly like the photograph had suggested. Small, quiet, forgettable. Nothing about it matched the life she had once lived, and yet everything about it felt deliberate, like she had chosen it because it erased everything that came before. He parked without drawing attention, a habit so ingrained it required no thought. The engine died, and for a moment he sat there, hands resting on the wheel, staring at the street ahead. This was it. 3 years of searching, of tearing through information and lies and silence had led him here, to a place that should not have mattered. His pulse did not race, it slowed. Control even now. He stepped out into the cold, the air sharp against his skin, and walked. The bakery was easy to find. The faint glow from inside, the smell of bread already in the air, the sign hanging slightly crooked above the door. Everything about it spoke of routine, of normalcy, of a life that had nothing to do with him. That was what made it feel unreal. He stopped at the porch. Rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavier, steady, persistent. He didn't move, didn't step back, didn't care. He could hear movement inside. Soft, measured. Someone going about their morning without knowing that everything was about to change. His hand lifted, paused, then dropped. He didn't knock, because somehow he knew she would come. And she did. The door opened without warning, like the moment had been waiting for itself to happen. She stood there, framed by warm light and quiet air, and for the first time in 3 years he saw her without distance, without memory, without anything between them. She was real, and she was not alone. The children were the first thing his mind rejected, not because they were unexpected, but because they were impossible in a way that logic could not immediately accept. One on each hip, small, steady, part of her in a way that made them belong there completely. Then the girl looked up. Gold. His breath stopped. The boy didn't move the same way. He watched instead, still and observant, his gaze sharp in a way that should not exist in someone so young. Recognition did not build. It detonated. His. There was no doubt, no hesitation, no need for confirmation. His. His throat closed around words that refused to form properly. The world narrowed to the space between him and the door, to her face, to their faces, to the truth standing in front of him like something that could not be undone. She saw it happen, saw the exact moment he understood. And she didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't step back. She held them closer instead. The distance between them was only a few feet, but it felt wider than anything he had ever crossed. Wider than cities, wider than years, wider than everything that had happened between the moment she left and the moment he found her again. He tried to speak. Her name came out first. Broken. Unsteady. Nothing like the voice people feared. And then everything ended the way it had begun. With a door slamming shut. The sound echoed in the quiet street, sharp enough to cut through the rain, final enough to leave no room for misunderstanding. The lock clicked, small but absolute, and just like that, she was gone again. But this time, he knew what was on the other side. And that changed everything. He didn't move for a long time. The rain soaked through his clothes, ran down his face, blurred the edges of the world around him. None of it mattered. Not the cold, not the silence, not the fact that he had just been shut out of the only place he had been trying to reach for 3 years. Because behind that door were his children. And he had only just found them. So instead of leaving, instead of turning back to the life that had never felt emptier, he stepped down from the porch, sat on the wet wooden steps and waited. For the first time in his life, the man who never waited for anything chose to. He did not leave. That was the first thing the town noticed, though no one said it out loud. Men like him did not belong in places like Gray Hollow, and yet there he was, sitting on a porch in the rain like he had nowhere else to go. Hours passed, the kind that stretch thin and uncomfortable, where time feels heavier than it should. The rain slowed, then stopped, then returned again in soft bursts, but he stayed exactly where he was, unmoving, as if the world had narrowed to a single point and he refused to step away from it. Inside, she felt him there. Not through sound, not through sight, but through something deeper, something she had spent 3 years trying to bury under routine and distance and silence. She moved through the small kitchen with careful precision, hands steady as she prepared breakfast, as if everything was normal, as if the past had not just arrived and taken a seat outside her door. The children stayed close to her, unusually quiet at first, sensing something they could not name but could feel all the same. Lena broke first. She always did. She was not built for silence, not built for stillness, not built to ignore something that caught her attention. She stood near the window, peeking through the curtain with open curiosity, her small fingers gripping the fabric like she might pull the entire world closer if she tried hard enough. "Mama," she said, her voice soft but insistent, "the big man is still there." Sarah didn't turn. She already knew. "I know." "Why?" Lena asked, tilting her head in a way that felt too familiar, too much like someone else. "Doesn't he have a home?" The question landed harder than it should have. "He does," Sarah replied carefully. "He just doesn't belong here." Ash said nothing. He rarely did when things mattered. Instead, he watched. Not the door, not the window, but her. His eyes tracked every movement, every shift in her breathing, every small tension in her shoulders. He did not need explanations. He gathered truths from the spaces between words. Outside, the man who had built an empire on control sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped loosely in front of him like he was holding onto something invisible. He had faced men with guns, negotiated with enemies who would have killed him without hesitation, stood in rooms where one wrong word could start a war, and none of it had prepared him for this. Waiting, not commanding, not taking. Just existing in the space she had allowed him, even if that space was nothing more than the edge of her life. By midday, the town had noticed. People passed by slower than usual, glancing once, then twice, curiosity pulling at them in quiet ways. No one approached him. Something about him made that impossible. Even here, in a place untouched by his world, the weight of who he was still lingered in the way he held himself, in the stillness that was not calm but contained. The first interruption came in the form of concern, not confrontation. A man from down the street, older, practical, the kind who fixed things without asking questions, stopped a few feet away and studied him. "You planning on sitting there all day?" he asked, not unkindly. The answer came without hesitation, "Yes." The man nodded slowly, as if that explained everything and nothing at the same time. You'll catch cold. I won't. Another nod, then he walked away. Inside, Sarah pressed her hands against the counter, her breath shallow, her control thinning in ways she did not like. This was not how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to leave. Men like him always left when they were told to. Pride demanded it. Power required it. But he wasn't leaving. And that was dangerous in a way she had not prepared for. Because it meant he was not here as a Don. He was here as something else. Lena tugged at her sleeve again. Mama, can we give him bread? The question was so simple it felt like a trap. No. Why not? Because he didn't ask for it. Lena frowned, thinking that over in the serious way she approached everything. But he looks hungry. The image hit Sarah before she could stop it. Him sitting there, unmoving, not eating, not leaving, not doing anything except existing in a space where he had no control. It didn't match the man she remembered. It didn't match the man she had run from. And that mismatch unsettled her more than anything else. Time stretched. The sun moved. The town shifted through its day, and still he remained. When evening came, the air cooled, shadows lengthened, and the light inside the cottage grew warmer, softer, like it was protecting something fragile. Lena fell asleep first, curled against her side, her small body finally surrendering to the exhaustion she never admitted to. Ash stayed awake longer, his gaze drifting toward the door once, then back to her, as if measuring something he did not yet understand. He's not going away, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again, steady, controlled, but no longer untouched. No, she admitted. Outside, the man who had once commanded entire cities lifted his head slightly, his eyes fixed on the door that had not opened again, his patience stretching into something that felt less like waiting and more like a decision. And inside, for the first time since he arrived, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Just the smallest, most dangerous crack. Because he wasn't forcing his way in. He was staying. And that meant this was no longer about power. It was about endurance. And endurance was something she understood all too well. The truth did not arrive in a single moment. It came slowly, like something long buried forcing its way to the surface, piece by piece, until it could no longer be ignored. She had heard his words that first day through the door, fragments carried by rain and distance, but she had not believed them. Not fully. Belief required trust, and trust was something that had died the night she walked away. Still, doubt had begun to grow, quiet and unwelcome, feeding on the parts of the past that had never quite made sense. It started with small things, memories that shifted when she looked at them too closely. The way his voice had sounded that night, not clear, not steady, but rough, uneven, like it didn't belong to him. The way his eyes had looked when he saw her in the doorway, not guilty, not defensive, but shocked in a way that felt too real to be acted. She had pushed those thoughts away for years, buried them under survival, under motherhood, under the need to keep moving forward without looking back. But now he was here, sitting in the same town, breathing the same air, and those buried questions refused to stay quiet. He didn't push her. That was what made it worse. If he had demanded, if he had used the weight of who he was to force his way back into her life, she would have known how to respond. Anger was easy. Resistance was familiar. But this patience, this quiet presence that asked for nothing and took nothing, it left her with space. And space was dangerous because it allowed her to think. 3 days passed before she spoke to him again. It was evening, the light fading into that soft gray that made everything feel suspended between day and night. The children were inside, distracted with something simple, something safe, and she stepped onto the porch like she had already decided what she needed to do. He was there, just as he had been every day, sitting on the steps, his posture relaxed but not careless, his attention shifting to her the moment the door opened. For a second, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt smaller now, not physically, but in a way that was harder to define. You said it wasn't real, she said finally, her voice steady, controlled, but no longer cold. That night, you said it wasn't what it looked like. He didn't move, didn't try to close the distance, didn't reach for her in any way that might break the fragile balance that had formed between them. It was. Then explain it, she said, sharper now, the edge returning. Explain how I saw what I saw and how you expect me to believe anything else." His jaw tightened, not in anger but in restraint. "I was drugged." The word hung in the air, heavy and difficult, like something that refused to settle into place. She didn't react immediately, didn't give him anything. That's convenient. "It's the truth." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in it that carried weight on its own, something worn down by repetition, by saying the same thing over and over again to people who never believed him. She crossed her arms, holding herself together in a way that felt instinctive. "And you expect me to just accept that?" "No," he said quietly. "I expect you not to." That caught her off guard, just enough to shift something inside her, just enough to make her listen instead of shutting him out completely. "I didn't know what was happening," he continued, his gaze steady on hers, not avoiding, not hiding. "Not at first. Everything felt wrong, blurred, like I was there but not fully in control. I remember her being close, too close. I remember trying to push it away, trying to step back, but my body wasn't responding the way it should have." And then he stopped for a second, something tightening in his expression. "Then you were there." The memory hung between them, sharp and unrelenting. "And I saw your face," he finished, quieter now. "And I knew something was wrong, but it was already too late." She shook her head slightly, not in denial, but in frustration, in the kind of anger that comes from not knowing what to believe. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't, which is why I didn't stop there." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly, like he had been waiting for this moment but wasn't sure it would ever come. "I spent 3 months tearing apart everything I had access to. Every connection, every transaction, every person who had been near me that night. I found the supplier, the one who provided the drugs. I found the route it came through, the people who handled it, the messages that connected it all back to her." Her breath caught just for a second. "Your sister," he said, the words deliberate, precise. "She wasn't alone. She was working with a rival family. They needed you out of the way, needed me compromised, needed the one thing I never allowed anyone to touch, to break." The world felt like it tilted slightly, like something fundamental had shifted without warning. "They planned it," he continued, his voice quieter now but no less steady. "Every detail. The timing, the setting, the way it would look if you walked in at the exact moment they needed you to see it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy." She didn't speak, couldn't. Because suddenly, the pieces that had never quite fit started to align. The unease she had felt before that night. The way her sister had been everywhere, too present, too involved, too comfortable in spaces she should not have occupied. The way everything had unfolded with a precision that now felt deliberate instead of chaotic. "Where is she now?" she asked finally, her voice lower, steadier than she felt. His expression didn't change. "Gone." The word was simple, final. "And the family she worked with?" "Gone." Silence settled again, heavier this time, filled with something that was not quite relief and not quite anger, but something deeper, something more complicated. She had spent 3 years believing one truth, building her life around it, surviving because of it. And now that truth was shifting. Not disappearing, but changing. She looked at him, really looked at him, not as the man she had run from, not as the Don everyone feared, but as the person standing in front of her now. Tired, worn down, carrying something that looked a lot like regret. 3 years, she said quietly. 3 years of my life gone. His gaze didn't waver. "I know." 3 years of raising them alone, of not knowing if I was making the right choices, of, her voice faltered just slightly before she steadied it again, of believing I had been thrown away. "You weren't," he said, immediate certain. She let out a small, humorless breath. It felt like it. "I know," he repeated, softer now. And for the first time since he arrived, the anger inside her shifted. Not gone. Not forgiven. But redirected. Because the pain was still there. The years were still gone. It might not be the one who deserved it. And that realization was more unsettling than anything else. Because if he wasn't the villain of her story, then everything she had built to survive him suddenly felt less certain. And that left her standing in a place she had not prepared for, one where the past was no longer clear, and the future was even less so. It did not end with a decision. There was no moment where everything suddenly became clear, no line crossed that separated past from future in a clean, satisfying way. Instead, it unfolded slowly, like everything that mattered had learned to move at a pace she could survive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into something quieter, something steadier, where his presence stopped feeling like an intrusion and started feeling like something that had always been missing. He stayed just as he said he would, not in her house, not in her space, but close enough that the distance between them no longer felt like an escape route. A small place 2 streets away became his, stripped of everything that once defined him. No guards, no constant calls, no reminders of the empire that waited for him to return. The man who had controlled cities now walked children to the bakery in the morning, one on each side, their small hands wrapped around his fingers like they had always belonged there. She watched it happen before she allowed herself to believe it. Lena claimed him first, with the kind of fearless certainty that left no room for doubt. She talked to him, demanded his attention, pulled him into her world like she had been waiting for him all along. Ash was different, quieter, careful. He observed before he acted, measured every word, every gesture, until one evening, without warning, he climbed into his lap and stayed there, resting in a way that said more than any question could. That was when something inside her shifted again. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. He was their father, and he was not walking away. The truth of what had happened did not erase the years. It did not erase the nights she had spent alone, the fear she had swallowed, the strength she had been forced to build piece by piece. Those things remained, etched into her in ways that could not be undone. But the anger that had once been sharp and consuming had begun to lose its direction, no longer anchored to the man in front of her in the same way it had been before. The night everything changed again was not dramatic. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, no final argument that demanded resolution. It was quiet, almost painfully so. Ash had a fever, the kind that came suddenly and climbed too fast, turning his small body into something fragile and frightening in a matter of minutes. She had handled fevers before. She had handled everything alone before. But this was different. Something about it felt wrong in a way she could not ignore. She called him without thinking. He was there before the second call could even finish ringing. There was no hesitation in the way he moved, no uncertainty, no distance. He stepped into her space like he belonged there, not as a don, not as a man who commanded, but as a father who knew exactly what to do. He took Ash carefully, his hand steady, his presence grounding in a way that cut through her rising panic. And then he did something she had never seen before, something that had no place in the world she had known him in. He lowered his voice and spoke softly, not words meant to be understood, but something deeper, something instinctive, a rhythm, a calm, a presence that settled over the child like a promise that everything would be okay. Ash's breathing slowed. The tension left his small body gradually, the fever breaking in a way that felt almost impossible. She stood there watching, her chest tight with something she could not name. This was what she had missed. This was what had been taken from them. Not just the years, but the moments, the small, quiet ones that mattered more than anything else. When it was over, when Ash was asleep and the house had settled back into silence, she found herself standing in the kitchen with him, the distance between them no longer wide enough to hide behind. The words came without preparation, without strategy, without the careful control she had relied on for so long. "I'm tired," she said, her voice softer than it had been in years. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the silence. "I'm tired of doing this alone, tired of being angry, tired of pretending that none of this matters when it does." He stepped closer then, not enough to overwhelm, just enough to be there if she chose it. "I know," he said quietly. She looked at him, really looked at him, not as the man who had hurt her, not as the man who had lost her, but as the one who had come back and stayed, who had waited without forcing, who had chosen patience over power. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "You don't have to," he replied. "We just have to stop breaking it." The simplicity of it settled into her in a way nothing else had. Not a promise of perfection. Not a demand for forgiveness. Just a choice. To try. She closed the distance herself this time, a small step that felt larger than anything she had done in years. His hand lifted slowly, giving her time to pull away if she needed to, but she didn't. She leaned into him, not fully, not completely, but enough to feel the steadiness she had once trusted. The bond between them did not roar back to life. It didn't need to. It was there, quiet, patient, waiting to be rebuilt. The ceremony, when it happened, was not in a grand hall or under the watchful eyes of people who measured worth in power and influence. It was in the small garden behind her home, where the air smelled like lavender and the ground felt real beneath their feet. There were no witnesses that mattered beyond the ones who had stood by her when she had nothing. The children ran between them, laughter filling the space where silence had once lived. He did not wear a suit that marked him as untouchable. She did not wear anything that reminded her of a life she had left behind. They stood as they were now, stripped of everything that had once defined them except the one thing that still remained. Choice. When he spoke, it was not as a Don making a claim, but as a man asking for something he knew he could not take. And when she answered, it was not because she had forgotten. It was because she had decided that what they could build now was stronger than what had been broken before. In the end, it was not about power. It was about what remained when power was gone. And what remained was them.